Hello, in this video we're going to show you how to create an example scene in Cocos2d-x JavaScript. If you're interested in C++ game development, don't worry because we've got you covered. There's a separate video already uploaded, so check that out as well. So what we're going to be doing, because we've in the past few videos discussed about how to create backgrounds, how to create game assets, we've even set up our new multi-design philosophy 2.0 in code for JavaScript and C++, so check those videos out depending on what coding language you're using. But we haven't actually created really any scene or anything in code, and that's obviously, I would say, the most important part, because that's what allows you to get to a playable game. And what we're going to be doing is creating a scene that has a background which is centered. We're going to have a play button which is centered. I'm just going to be using sprites to keep it simple, but the principles that you'll learn in this video apply to menu buttons, UI elements, whatever you're using, because essentially we're just going to be using the set position and set anchor point methods, so they apply to everything. Because this video isn't about creating a functional scene, it's about creating a scene that looks good on different devices. Also, just want to point out, even though I'm doing this in Xcode on Mac, this works in Eclipse, this works for Android, whether you're doing it on Xcode, whether you're doing it in Windows or on Mac or even on Linux. I just want to iterate that because in the past we've had several questions about a lot of our videos asking when are we going to do an Android version. But the reality is most of our videos that are on Cocos2d-x are the same, simply because there's no platform specific code, hence the beauty of Cocos2d-x. It's cross-platform. So I just want to iterate that, though I'm doing it in an iOS environment. We've tested it, this works fine on Android, and the process is exactly the same. Like I was saying, we've got some assets added, and this is a play button which will be in the center of the screen. We've got a sound button which we're going to position it in the center in the x-axis, but it's going to be flush to the bottom of the screen. Then we've got two social buttons, Facebook and Twitter. One's going to be in the top left and one's going to be in the top right, so you can see that there's items all over the place, centered, some in different corners, some sort of centered and then flush to the bottom or different edges, and we'll actually show you it running on a variety of devices. Like I said, though I'm not doing it on Android, the process is exactly the same, so there won't be a separate video for it. We're going to run it on iPad Pro, 4, 5, 6s Plus, that sort of stuff, so you can see it working on a variety of devices. We've got these assets already added, and we've already even coded them into our resource.js, simply because that's not part of this video. That is something separate, and realistically, if you're watching this series, you should already have a basic understanding of the way Cocos2d-x and Cocos2d-x JavaScript works. If you don't, then check out our other videos. You'll learn a lot regarding the workings of Cocos2d-x and how amazing it is. So I'm just going to go to app.js. The first thing that we need to do is var director equals cc.director.get instance, and we're going to use this to get the screen size, not the actual canvas size that we set in main.js, which is 768 by 1136, because I'm doing it in portrait mode. If you're doing it in landscape mode, then you can easily switch it over, but the principle is exactly the same. We're not actually getting this size simply because your screen may be not as wide as 768 or may not be as tall as 1136, and as a result we don't want to be positioning items. Let's say if we position it in the top left, we don't want the top left to be outside of the screen. We want the top left to be, well, the top left of what is visible. So that's the reason we're going to get the visible size. So that's what the screen size is in terms of what the user can see. So var, I'm going to do win size equals director dot get visible size Now next we're gonna get the origin, so var origin equals director dot get this visible origin, and the origin is used when there are devices that don't have, or whose screen size isn't the exact width or the exact height of the resolution that we set in the main.js. So there's basically some part of it has been cropped, and we need to factor in the origin because otherwise it will be positioned according to the rest of the site screen, and that's something we don't want at all. So what we're going to do now is just sort out the code formatting. The code formatting in Xcode for Cocos2d-x is terrible. It's so horrible, but you got to soldier on. So first of all, we're going to do var background equals new cc dot sprite, and for this we're going to do res dot background underscore png, and now what we're going to do is do background dot set anchor point, set this to 0.5 and 0.5. Some of you more experienced Cocos2d-x developers out there might be looking at this and thinking this line of code is essentially pointless because a sprite node is automatically set to 0.5 by 0.5 in terms of the anchor point. And you're right, it is. But we've come across certain elements in Cocos2d-x, I believe certain UI elements, and possibly many, but I'm positive certain UI elements don't have their anchor point set to 0.5, 0.5 by default, and as a result that can cause issues. If you know what you're doing and you have a manual anchor point and you adjust your positioning code accordingly, then that's fine, you can do that. But for the beginners out there, just set the anchor point to 0.5, 0.5, just to make sure it's always in the center. And the anchor point is essentially what everything uses when it's affecting that particular item. So this background, for example, the anchor point is 0.5, 0.5, so that's centered in the x-axis and centered in the y-axis. So it's normalized, it ranges between 0 and 1, not 0 and the actual width of the background in pixels. It's normalized, which is fantastic. So if we were to position this at 0, 0, the background, we're not going to, but in case, just imagine if we did, it would actually position, actually let me just scale this a bit, there we go. It would actually position the background, or the center of the background, here. Here. Not the bottom left of the background, but the center of the background, because that's the anchor point. And if we were to say move it by 200 pixels, though it's moving everything by 200 pixels, it's the actual center point which will be, let's say, yeah, plus 200 from where it was initially. That's just something to bear in mind. But like I said, if you just set this by default, you'll be all good to go. So background.set position, and for this we're gonna get win size dot width divided by 2 plus origin dot x win size dot height divided by 2 plus origin dot y. Okay, let's just explain what we've done. We've got the win size, and if it's starting in the bottom left, which that's where it is, and we want to center it, we want to move it halfway along the screen, and to do that we get the width of the screen and divide it by 2, so we got half of the screen size in terms of the width, and we've added origin.x just to make sure anything that isn't on screen, basically any sort of canvas, or with Android because they have buttons that are sometimes on screen, off screen, that changes and adds origin to it. It just makes sure it factors it in, and the principle is the same for the height as well. Now we're going to do this dot add child, and now we're going to do background, sort out the code formatting. Now it's going to quickly run this, just to show it you working. There you go, we got our background that's centered. We're not going to run it again until we've coded the rest of it. I just wanted to make sure that this was working a-okay. So now I'm going to simply copy this, because the play button is going to have the same philosophy. It's centered in the middle, so we can literally just copy and paste all of this. This will remain the same. Anchor point isn't going to change in this video at all, so that can obviously remain the same. And for this, we can change to play button, which we set in the resource.js right here. So now sort this out. So now that we got the play button done, let's do the sound button. So this is where things are going to get a little more interesting. So let's just call this sound button. What was it called? It was called sound button. Duh. Sound button underscore PNG. In terms of the x-axis position, it's fine because we want it centered in the x-axis, so we can leave this as it is. Just remembered one more thing regarding origin. If, for example, you have, okay, I'll use this as an example. We got the background, we've set the position, and we want to set the position of the play button, but we're going to set it according to the position of the background. So we're going to get the background position and maybe do something with it. Let's say add 200 in the x-axis and leave the y-axis as it is. You might be tempted to add origin again, but you don't want to do that, because once you factored it in once, that's all you need. You don't need to factor in every time you set the position, because the only reason we're doing it again here is because we're not actually positioning it relative to any other item that we've added previously that has already factored in origin. Just wanted to mention that because that can sometimes cause issues as well. So we've got the sound button, like I was saying, it's centered in the x-axis, is exactly what we want. We don't want any of this because we're not moving it up, at least not that much. And you might be tempted to think we can just sort of get the sound button position, just leave it as it is. But the problem is, remember, the anchor point is 0.5, 0.5. So when okay, we got set position, it's moved to the right, so it's here, but the bottom of the button isn't here. It's the center of the button that's here. So only the top half is visible of the button, or will be, and only the bottom half is, the bottom half is hidden. Actually, you know what? I'm going to show you. So if I put 0, so I haven't modified this, I'm actually going to run it. I'm actually not going to show the play button, just show the sound button, because that's all we need to do. Ooh, sorry. Plus, remember, you always got to do origin.y, otherwise I can't properly illustrate the issue. There we go. Only half of the button is visible, and the reason is, like I was saying, it's positioned according to the anchor point, and the anchor point is set to the center of the item. So I think you guessed what we need to do. We need to move it up by half the height of the sound button. To do that, simple, do sound button the height divided by 2. You might be tempted to, let's say, put a magic number here. So if, for example, you know the sound button has a height of 100 pixels, you might be tempted to just put 50 there. And though this will work fine, the problem with that is, what if you change the sound button? Then what happens? And the height and the width change? You want to create it as dynamic as possible and avoid magic numbers as much as possible. So let's just run this. I did say I wasn't going to run it till it was done, but it does help illustrate the point. And as you can see, it's now flushed to the bottom. So now we're going to add a social button here and a social button here. So let's just sort out the positioning of this. Uncomment that, copy the sound button because we can use quite a bit of it. We're going to rename this to Facebook. We're going to have Facebook button in the top left. I believe it's just called Facebook, not Facebook button. Yep, and that's the same with Twitter as well. So we don't actually need any of this, simply because we're not centering it in the x-axis and we're not making it flush to the bottom. So let's get rid of this. First of all, we need to move it by half the width, and the reason is, remember, it's set according to the anchor point, which is the center of the image. So we need to do Facebook button dot width divide by 2 plus origin dot x, and now we need to move it up by the screen's height because we want it at the top. So you do win size dot height. You might be tempted to think that, oh, plus origin dot y, obviously. You might be tempted to think that looks fine, that's great. But the problem is, remember, you got the anchor point set to 0.5, 0.5. So initially, when it's at the bottom, without, let's say, explicitly setting the position, the top half is visible, the bottom half is hidden. But by moving it up by the screen's height, the top half is now off the screen and the bottom half is visible. So we need to actually take away the, I'm just going to put it in brackets just to make sure this is calculated first, the Facebook button dot height divided by 2, so half of the Facebook button height. So let's just sort out the code formatting, copy this, and for this we're going to rename this to Twitter, rename, and rename, change this, and for this let's rename that to Twitter button. The height is going to remain the same because remember, it's going to be in the top right. So in terms of the Y position, it doesn't change in terms of the way the Facebook button is positioned. But for the X position, it does, because we want it in the top right corner. And how do we do that? Remember, it starts in the bottom left. So we've already made it go up. So how do we go all the way to the right? And if you've guessed that we can literally just copy and paste this code and modify it slightly, then you was correct. So just paste that. We're going to change this to width, change this to width, because though these buttons are actually square in terms of the raw image size, they might not be. So you want to make sure you use factor in width when you're doing the set position for the x-axis and factor in the height for the y-axis. Change this to an X, and I believe we're actually ready to run this bad boy now. So let's just run it. There you go, we got our beautiful scene. And why is it so beautiful? We have our background that's centered, got our play button that's in the middle, we got our sound button that's flush to the bottom of the screen, we've got our social button, our Facebook in this instance, that's in the top left, we got Twitter, that's in the top right. And the beauty of it is, if let's say I change it to an iPhone 4S, which has a ratio of 2:3 in portrait, whereas an iPad has 3:4, you will see it doesn't look odd, and you'll see what I mean by that in a moment. Let's just wait for this to run, just linking it up now. I do sometimes wish that the build process was quicker, but we are getting faster and faster with this sort of stuff. Come on. This is like an example of first world problems for a programmer, waiting for it to generate. Okie dokie, here we go, there we go. As you can see, that's still on the top left, that's still in the top right, centered, and at the bottom, even though it's actually a taller screen now. Using our dynamic code, it's positioned every single time, as you'll see in a moment, exactly where we want it to be. So let's try on 5S, which is even taller. It's basically 16:9 if you're holding it in landscape mode. In portrait, 9:16. It's slightly off, but it's essentially 16:9. Like I said, check this out on Android. The coding is exactly the same. You just need to run it using, let's say, Terminal, Command Prompt, or Eclipse, or Android Studio, something like that. But the code is exactly the same. We will have this code on the GitHub page for this series. Check that out. There'll be a link in the description as well. So if you're getting stuck or you just want to check it out before you start watching the video fully. As you can see, though it's visibly taller, nothing looks cropped. everything is in the exact position that we expect it to be. This isn't, let's say, here and there isn't a massive gap above it. And finally, we'll just show you 6S. 6 doesn't really matter which one, because this ratio is essentially the same as iPhone 5 as well. But we'll just show you what it looks like. As you can see, it looks fantastic on this as well. So just a few closing points. When you're setting the position of items, you always want to make it dynamic. Don't use magic numbers. Factor in the screen size. So we've done the win size dot width. If, for example, you wanted this button to be 60% up from the bottom, so imagine if you wanted the center of it 60% up from the bottom, the way you would do that, you would do win size dot height times by 0.6 or divide by 100 and times by 60. It gets the same result. So that's the way you position them, and that way if you go on literally any Android device or any iOS device or literally any device at all, it's always going to be 60% up from the bottom. You might be thinking, okay, what if I want it 5% from the top? You got to look at it the other way. How much is it from the bottom? Because the items by default start at the bottom, and the way you look at it, if you want it 5% from the top, the total height is 100% obviously, so you do 100% minus the amount you want it positioned from the top, which is 95%, and then you position it accordingly. So you do win size dot height times by 0.95. Another thing, make sure you always factor in origin unless you're positioning an item that's relative to another item that's already factored in origin. I know there is a lot to take in, but the beauty is once you've set it up, once you get to grips with it, you'll have some great looking games that use one set of assets that will be efficient, that will just work amazingly well with one base code. But if you do have any questions, anything at all, feel free to post them on sonarlearning.co.uk/questions.php. That's our completely free educational platform with over 6,500 free videos and more videos being added on a daily basis. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Please comment and subscribe. And as usual, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.